Super Nintendo, the game-changing company that unlocked the power of play, by Keza MacDonald. This was a fun book to read and a fun one to talk about. I'm excited to do the review here today on this book. So let's jump right into it. Keza is the video games editor at The Guardian, where she writes the Pushing Buttons newsletter. I think she's worked her whole life in the industry. So she worked at IGN doing game reviews and things like that. So she's definitely a good person to write a book about this topic. So jumping into the book itself, it's what I was expecting in some ways, but almost in a better way. And I'll kind of explain what I mean by that is that it's not just about the console Super Nintendo, right? If you think about the company Nintendo, one of the things that they are known for and at the same time get criticism for is they spend a lot of time and money and energy in the hardware and software space. So they produce the system, the Nintendo system, the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, all that stuff. And a lot of the criticism was, well, why don't you just focus on the games, right? And they kind of became known more for the games at times. And so this book is about all of that. It's about the journey. It's about how they created games, what their thought process was behind it. And what she does in each chapter is it's sort of focused on like a game itself, like a game title. But there are other things in here as well. Like she has, the first chapter is called Ultra Hand. It's the history, like the origins of the company. And then it mostly gets into games. Like it's sort of like she tells the story of the company Nintendo through games, right? Donkey Kong, Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Wii Sports, Kirby, right? Kind of like some of the most well-known games and characters because they help tell the story of the company Nintendo. And Nintendo as a company is a hard nut to crack, right? Like it's not a Western US company where they do a lot of public disclosures and things like that. You know, Eastern companies, Japanese companies, they're not, they don't like to be in the media, right? A lot of these guys, a lot of the developers, the founders, they like to be behind the scenes. They don't like to share all the details. It's more of a traditional approach to building a company. And so it's hard to get information, but she does get as much as you can get. She does interviews with people, developers, founders, but even then and she talks about it as like, there's so much more to tell. That being said, this is probably the most detail you're gonna get on the company Nintendo. And it's the history of the games, right? Like the things that, for me personally, I grew up playing Nintendo games. It's what made me fall in love with video games. And when you look back now, which is kind of obviously the way I do, I don't play video games anymore. It's the nostalgia for me of a simpler time. I think about that with everything, but particular video games. It's the fact that you could plug into a game in the old days, in the Super Nintendo games, and you could plug into it, play it, have fun, and jump out of it. It doesn't feel like that with games anymore today. Games today it's like it sucks you in. It's all about DLCs and add-on content and forever play and huge online multiplayer games. That's just never been what Nintendo's about. And so I fell in love with video games because of Nintendo. And unfortunately for me personally, I don't see games like that today anymore. My favorite game growing up was the Zelda games. Like the original Zelda, A Link to the Past kind of made me fall in love with it. And then I actually think there might have even been one before that. But then the next one, the Ocarina of Time on Nintendo 64. Like I would say personally, Nintendo 64 is what catapulted my love of video games. That original Mario on N64, the Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, like just it made me fall in love with games. And she goes into detail on those books in particular here. And what's cool so much, what I enjoyed learning about with this book with Nintendo is how much the developers and the creators of these games just essentially took things in their life and they created games around those things. Like, one of the chapters that she has here in this book is going through Pokemon and the Pokemon Go game. And the origins of Pokemon Go were from someone who loved being out in nature and finding bugs, right? And so he started coming up with different creations and bugs, and then all of a sudden this game is created around it. And I think if you're an artist of anything, right, if you're a creative person, that's the best way to create stuff, is when you just have a passion for something and you take that passion and you sort of turn it into a job or a business. A lot of things nowadays, in my opinion, are the reverse, especially the video games industry and especially movies. Movies and video games today, I once heard someone say this and it always resonated with me, is that it feels like movies and video games are produced instead of directed now. And that really rang true to me, because it's like, hey, how do we make a lot of money doing this thing? Marvel movies are a good example of this. Is if you're not going to make $1 billion, we don't want to hear the script, right? That's the way things are now. And it's the same way in the video game industry. In my personal opinion, the video game industry has been destroyed. When your concern is about making money, you're not going to have a passion and a love for it. And it's not going to tell a love story. And, you know, it's the same way with music, right? My favorite music was when artists were just telling their life stories through their music. And that's what Nintendo does. Nintendo was so good at that. All their characters, the Marios and Luigis, they wanted them to be blue collar because that's how they thought of people and how that's what related to more people. I mean, it's long been talked about in the lore of Mario is that he's just this old plumber with a mustache. It's a weird thing to be a hero, but that's Nintendo. And I loved that about it. Or I loved that about Nintendo. And so, you know, she goes into all that. Nintendo is, like we talked about, it's a notoriously secret company. I have a bit of a personal connection to them in the sense of being in Washington State. Nintendo, again, kind of behind the scenes, owned had controlling interest and was the primary owner of the Seattle Mariners. The Mariners were going to be leaving, and Nintendo had a big presence. Their biggest presence in America was here in Washington State. It was actually in Redmond, Washington. And the owner at the time thought that a way to give back to the community would be to buy the Seattle Mariners. And he did it behind the scenes. Famously, he never attended a baseball game for over 20 years. And over time, he got a lot of criticism for that. But if you really think back to the ethos of Nintendo, it's what they're all about. He's not a baseball guy. He didn't buy it because he loves baseball. He bought it for the community because he wanted to keep the team here. And that's what happened. And interestingly enough, when controlling interest was shared off, not trying to get into too much details here on sports, the company, the new ownership, the Stanton Group, there were a lot of issues, right? Especially with the things they said publicly and behind the scenes. So I don't know. I just think that that's I love the way Nintendo thinks and operates. The other thing that she talks a lot about in this book is their willingness to take risks and fail. That's, I think, another important part of their journey and why they have created such masterpieces is when you're willing to fail, make mistakes, and not be primarily driven by money, you're gonna create some great wins for people and obviously some huge failures. You know, two things that come to my mind with Nintendo. First is Metroid. I know Metroid kind of has a cult following. I played Metroid a bit, but not a ton, but I had friends growing up who loved Metroid, especially Super Metroid. That was not and never has been one of the most popular games, but it has a cult following and it made money for them, so they kept producing games. But it's not even close to their largest selling game. But they were willing to take risks, and at that time, that was very off the cuff, right? It was like a darker theme, science fiction. It wasn't even really a Nintendo type game. You end up with this big secret at the end, the reveal that Samus is a woman. That was another kind of big thing. She talks a little bit about that in this book as well. But that was a big risk. Wii Sports, right? Or just even the Wii in general, having a remote that wasn't an actual controller, but it was like this little stick. That was a big risk that they were willing to take. You don't see these things today. Of course, Nintendo still tries to do them. But when I think about art, and when I say art, I mean things like music, movies, video games. If you come from a place of like, hey, let's just create something that we love and we hope other people will love it too, you're gonna be a beloved company. And like I talked about earlier, if you tend to do things where you're just, how can we make money? How can we sell the thing? You end up with botched games like what has happened to the Call of Duty series. Man, another big one for me was, I don't know, Borderlands. If you guys played Borderlands, I loved the original Borderlands and Borderlands 2, but my gosh, did that game get destroyed in Borderlands 3, and I don't even know where it's at now. Just with the way we add on content, the ethos of video games, in my opinion, has just changed. So Super Nintendo was nostalgic for me. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s and played, I would say, just the Super Nintendo console or Nintendo 64, it's gonna bring back dreams and memories of yours. There's so many games that I hadn't thought of when reading this. Like, if you remember Star Fox on Nintendo 64, I loved that game so much. Pilot Wings was another super cool game that I loved on Nintendo 64. You know, I'll quickly, and then I'll finish this off here. I know I've been going a little bit long, but on her top 10, so this is her top 10 games ever by Nintendo. So The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I never played that. I've stopped playing video games, it's newer. But Super Mario 64 was number 2. That's probably my number 2. Number 3 for her was the Ocarina of Time, the Zelda game. That's probably my number 1. Super Mario Brothers, Animal Crossing, again, never played that, but I know that was huge. Then Majora's Mask was number 6, Mario Brothers 3, Mario Odyssey, Super Metroid number 9, and rounding out top 10 was The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I wish she would have done chapters on like Mario Kart. Mario Kart was a huge one for me. She does spend a lot of time on Smash Brothers, so I don't know. This is a fun one. It isn't as much details, like I said, on the games itself, like revealing secrets of the games. Like, how did they come up with this secret or this riddle? It's more kind of the history of each game. But I think you're gonna like this one if you played Nintendo growing up, if you have an interest in the company, even if you still play it. So that's the review, Super Nintendo by Keza MacDonald. Hope you enjoyed. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. Thank you.